On our agenda, where we left off last time was calculating the interest credit. Actually, let's bring up the GitHub repo, and we can look at the commits that we did. So this one, decided to go the route of calculating the interest on demand. The problem is that it gets calculated every time if it's the first of the month. The other problem, which I didn't realize until, I don't know, I was thinking of something else, I realized if the balance is never requested on the first, it will never get credited. So for example, if you check the balance on January 31st, but then don't check it again until February 2nd, the interest won't get credited for January. Not a good thing. My son would be unhappy about not getting his 25 cents of interest. So the solution to having it calculate on demand every time, the solution for that and the solution for the problem that I just mentioned, where it doesn't get calculated at all if you don't get it on query the balance on the first, is really the same problem. We need to figure out some way of having sort of pending actions sort of catch up, or some way of tracking, have we credited interest for this date? Now, if we look at let's go back to here. If we look at what the, where is it? Where is the CSV file? Here it is. If we look at what this looks like, what we can do is we can figure this out. So for example, if let's say this was our data, we can see that on January 1st, interest was credited. So what we want to be able to do is, if the balance is being checked, so we'll still do it on demand, and it's the first of the month, then we'll check, has interest been credited for this month? So that solves that problem. The problem of the catch-up is basically we could just check on every balance, have we calculated interest for all of the months? Basically all the, because maybe, what if you don't check your balance for like several months? Then we'll have to do some catch-up. So in a sense, we want to basically magically make it appear as if the interest credit was always there. The other thing is we will have to make sure we calculate the interest from earliest missed date all the way to the latest, because interest compounds. Now, at the level of a couple $100, you won't notice a difference, but if the money amount is larger, and anyway, it should be correct. So what we want to do is we want to basically look at what was the last interest credit date, and then fill in all of the first of the months for the following months that we need to calculate interest credit for. Thanks, Alex, for watching. So this is going to be a little trickier, and from my days, as I mentioned before, I've worked on a billing system for insurance software, and date math is really hard. That stuff is kind of annoying. Luckily, the situation we're in, which is just the first of the month, and always the first of the month, that luckily is easier to calculate than things like the last date of the month, or every 2 weeks, or twice a month, those kinds of things that you deal with billing systems or payroll. Luckily, we won't have to deal with that. We're doing it, calculating the interest on the first of the month, and we just want to calculate any missing interest credits since the last one. So what that's going to look like is, if we look at, so you can see here in this set of, this is from the Excel spreadsheet, you can see that there was sort of a catch up of, what is it, eight transactions. So let's say these didn't exist, right? So now, the last interest that was actually credited was May 1st, 2018. And let's say today is today, which is January 28th when I'm recording this. So let's say it's January 28th, 2019, not 2018. So we're checking the balance on this date. And so now before we can return the balance, we need to do a catch-up, right? So we need to basically say, okay, what was the last date of interest calculated? That is May 1st. So that means we need to generate between May 1st and the 1st of the current month. So a little bit tricky there. We basically have to say, what is the current month? The current month is January. So basically we have to catch up from May 1st, increment the month. So that's going to be, we need to generate credits from last month plus 1. So sort of pseudo-coding it here. Last month plus 1 through current month yeah, I think that will work. Where with day equals 1. So let's look at, there's a technique that comes from acceptance test driven design, story test driven design, behavior driven design, all these kinds of things, saying, but the specific idea here is specification by example. The idea of give me some examples. So let's use this as an example. Let's be a bit more concrete about what we want to look for. Then we're going to turn this into a unit test, and then we'll implement the behavior. So the behavior we want is, and we'll use the given when then format just because it's pretty common. So given today is January 28th, 2019, and last interest credit was on May 1st, 2018, when we request balance on today, right, so 1/28, 2019, then we add interest credits for June 1st, 18, July 1st, just going to put the June 1st, July 1st, August 1st, September 1st, and yes, I'm being very explicit here, so I don't get any off by one errors. December 1st of 2018, and then January 1st of 2019. So that is what we want. So given this is the current day, so that's one scenario. We can then do another scenario, which is given today is February, so we'll try February 1st. And last interest credit was on January 1st, 2019. So we'll sort of assume that this story, came after this one. Then, so when we request balance, then we add credits for only for 2/1 of 2019. So those are sort of two positive cases where we're adding missing credits. The last one is, let's say given today is February 1st. So we'll do the case where balance is being checked multiple times on the 1st, and the last interest credit was on 2/1, 2019. When we request balance, then we don't add any credits, right? Because we already have one. And so basically do the last month plus 1. So the last month of credit would be 2 through the current month. So that'll be basically, we're crediting 3 through 2, which is basically an empty set, and so we won't do anything there. One more case is, we can do one more example. So given today is to February 2nd, and last interest credit was on 1/1/2019. When we request the balance, then we add credit for 2/1/2019. Right, so basically our formula is the last month for which there was credit. Right, so the last month for which there was credit is 1. We add 1, right, so that's 2, and then that's through the current month. Right, so we're requesting the balance on 2/2, so the current month is 2. So basically our set is going to be the set of 2. Whereas up here, our set, right, so basically last month, the last month there was credit was 5. So basically 5 of 2018. We tack on 1, and that's going to be 6 of 2018. So we're really generating months. We don't actually care about the days because we'll fill in the days, but dates generally want days anyway, so we'll just sort of coerce it to be 1. So basically we're going to end up with 5 of 2018 is the last month there was a credit. We tack on 1 to the month, we get 6 of 2018, and then that's going to be through the current month. So we requested this on January 28th here. So that's going to be through January 1st of 2019. And so that's going to be the set of, right, 6, 7, 8, 9, etc. to 1 of 2019. All right, so these scenarios, I think, cover all the situations. So we've got the situation where there's a big, backlog of interest to be credited. There's a separate scenario of, hey, what if the interest rate changes? What do we do? That adds complexity because now you have point in time when we're doing catch-up. What if the interest rate changed somewhere in the middle? I'm going to create a story for that because we're not going to cover that today. That is more than I want to cover today. So let's actually add a story for change interest rate for credits with a date on which the rate takes effect. Okay. Okay. So one thing I forgot to do was turn on my Pomodoro timer. So Pomodoro timer is set for 25 minutes. Okay. So we've got, let's see. So what's our test situation? I think we have a failing test. Right, so this is the failing test because we have, this is the test where we're doing 2 balance checks on the same day, basically on the first. So remember, we basically have our fixed clock to make sure that we can predict the outcome. So we can make sure we're identifying and hard coding the inputs so that it's isolated from the machine, so that we can make sure that we're on the first. So here's the case where we ask for the balance, right? And then we ask for the balance again. It should have only been credited once. It was credited twice. So the amount is wrong. So that was our failing test. So we're going to fix that, and that will fix the other problem that I mentioned of also doing catch-ups. Let's Just trying to think of, do we want to do the catch-up stuff first? Yeah, okay. So we're going to need a test, and we'll do that. So test. So here the test is going to be, we'll actually take that scenario, which is, let's do this scenario, because this is a little bit simpler, right? No gap, no huge gap of missing things. So that's going to be, let's do that. Okay. Formatting kind of sucks here. Let's fix that. Okay. So this test, let's see, so we'll call this missing 1 month credit should add 1 month credit. So given today is 2/1/19, so we already have a way of creating that situation, which is our clock. So clock of 2019-0201, and that's create a fixed clock on 2019-2/1. Then we're going to set up so that, and we'll basically we're setting up basically providing a bit more detail here, right? So we've got $100 credit that was already there previously. So that's the first part. And now what we need to do is make sure that we have that the last interest credit was on 1/1/2019. So we'll need to create a transaction for that. So account. So we're going to need a way to do an interest credit. Basically create an interest credit transaction. So right now the API for account doesn't have that. It has basically a deposit that takes date, amount, and the source. But what we actually want is inside transaction, it has the type of transaction, and we want that type of transaction to be an interest credit. Actually, I need to look. Does transaction actually have that type? Right now we've got, so the action actually currently is only either spend or deposit. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to figure out what does it mean that a transaction is an interest credit. So currently interest credits were being done as deposit, right? So if we go to account and we look at the interest credit part, which is up here, right? So here we did a deposit with the name, with the source of interest credit. Not quite sure that that's good enough, because there's sort of this idea of money coming into and out and going out of the account that is right, that's sort of outside the account versus stuff that's calculated internally by KidBank. So let me do this. So first of all, I want to, this test is currently failing, and I don't want it to continue to fail just yet. I want to basically ignore it until interest credit catch up is implemented. So I generally don't like to ignore tests, but on the flip side, I need to ignore this for a bit because I want to make sure basically all my other tests are passing. And it's a little bit of extra cognitive load if I have to look, oh, is this the test that I know is failing? So I'm going to ignore it, and I'm going to run all the tests so that I want to make sure everything else is working. The test I just wrote is going to fail, so we're not done with this yet. So we'll leave that. But all the other tests should pass. The reason why is actually we need to do a refactoring. I think we're going to do a refactoring where we're going to add a new transaction type. So currently we have spend and deposit, and I'm going to make a new transaction for credit. So I'm going to basically put this on hold for a minute, and we're going to do that. I don't think we will have any test failures. So let's go to transaction. And so we're at the point also, I was afraid we'd get here sooner or later. We're at the point where we're currently storing this as a string, and I use the type, the saying, our type is a string, which means we have really no good, we're not using types well enough. Really what we want is we want a value object that represents the transaction type. So what we want to do is pull this out into an enum. Just thinking if I want to do that now. You know what? I'm going to hold off on that for just a bit more because I think I want to do that as a separate refactoring. I don't want to pull that into this current refactoring because I want to focus on basically getting private static final string interest. I'm just going to call it interest. And the string will be interest credit. So now the signed amount won't have to change because there's the place where we're calculating the balance on the fly, and that's in account. And basically we're basically doing a map to int using signed amount, so it's summing over it. And so everything is stored as a positive amount, but we want to basically negate the spend. And so that's what this is doing. So basically spend, it basically flips the sign, so when we do a sum over all the numbers, we get the right amount. So we don't have to change anything here because by adding a new type interest credit, that's actually a positive, so that actually works out nicely. So what we want to do is we want to have another public static, basically another factory method where we're going to create interest credit. That takes a local date time, the amount, and this won't even take a string, string for the source because we actually already have that information. So we'll return a new transaction that is that is local date time with interest and the amount, and this is interest credit. Okay. That shouldn't change anything because we haven't used anything yet. Let's go now to account. Here's where we credit the interest, and we're doing a deposit, but we want to flip this to basically do, instead of deposit where we create the deposit and we add a new transaction, we want to do interest credit. So this is going to be interest credit. And we don't need anything else. And we will create a method for that. Whoops. So one thing you'll notice, I'm changing this code without writing a test. The reason why is actually this method should actually be private. So we have tests against the public API, right? Against the public, what's available publicly outside of account. And credit interest as needed is not something that is currently used outside. Let's create a method. It is void local date time. Call this interest amount. And then what this is going to do is on transaction, it's going to create an interest credit with the local date time and the interest amount. And we'll hold on to that. Transaction. And add new transaction of that transaction. Okay, so let's run our tests. And they all still pass, right? Because there was really no observable change. But now we have a, actually this should be private too. And so now we have a separate type of transaction that we can look for. So back to this interest credit test here. So we've set up we basically set up the account, setting the clock to a fixed date. We did an initial deposit, so there's money in the account. Now we want to do account so we want to credit interest. So currently this method is private. So from a test standpoint, just thinking, do I want to make this basically a public API method, or do I create the transaction manually through the transaction and then sort of side load it through? Just thinking, who's responsible for crediting the interest? Right now we have that. It's triggered by a request to balance. Let's make this public. We're not sort of poking in. We're giving it. It's okay as an API. So I think not terribly concerned about that. So we'll go interest credit. We'll do local date time at midnight of. So what we want to do is and the last interest credit was on 1/1/2019. So we do 2019 1/1, and the amount doesn't really matter. We can call it just 27 cents. So we've got, just going to move these comments closer to where we are. So given today is that date. And last was that date. When we request the balance, then an interest credit is added for 2/1/2019. So we'll get the balance. We actually don't care what the balance is, although we could check it. Now the question is how do we figure out what basically what transaction, basically how do we how do we assert this, that there was an interest credit added for 2/1/2019? We could just look at the transactions and look at to see that there is one for this date. Sure, let's try that. So basically, what we're going to look for is a transaction. This is the expected interest credit. That's transaction. So we expect this one to be local date, time, midnight, as of. So that we expect a transaction for February 1st of the amount, kind of don't care. Don't actually care about the amount because we check elsewhere that interest is being calculated correctly. So let's do this. So let's get the transactions. We'll get a list of transaction from account. Oops. So these are the transactions. Account, transactions. It's actually a mutable set. So it's really set of transaction. And what we want to do is in that we want to see if we do a stream, where we filter transaction dot date time is equal to local date time of 2019 to 1. Transaction. So we're streaming. What we want to do is we want to filter and we want to pull out the transaction where the date time is equal to February 1st. Actually want to do a slightly more complex filter. So I guess we could, let's see. So maybe we don't need that. And transaction dot action equals what is it called? No, not account. Transaction. Interest credit. This makes me uncomfortable copying this. Yeah, okay, so this is interesting. So this is a private static. The fact that it's a string should be internal. If I try to externalize that into this test, that means I'm gonna have a test that's dependent on its implementation. What I really want is I want to say, hey, transaction, you know, is interest credit. right? So I'm asking you, hey, are you an interest credit transaction? So we'll go ahead and create that and basically return action, I could spell, interest credit. Yeah, maybe I shouldn't do that, even though that would probably work because this is a constant, but we'll make sure that's. And that way, if when we change this to an enum, I only have to change it in here. I won't have to change it out here. Plus, this is easier to read. Oh, I got parentheses wrong. So we're basically saying, is the transaction on February 1st, and it's an interest credit, then I guess we can just say count. And then we can basically say var and assign that to that. This is a bit ugly. Let's see if we can clean this up. So yeah, this is really, actually let's extract this date out to a variable. So this is Feb of 2019 01. So Feb 1 of 2019. That's not what I wanted. I didn't want it here. I want it actually out here. So let's do this. That way we can then have that up there. Actually, I don't need it up there. So let's put it back down here. Okay, let's clean this up. Okay. And that. It's a little ugly, but not too bad. Okay. And so now assert that count is equal to 1. Is there a better, let's see. I don't use streams very often this way. I wonder if there's a better, so we just want to see, is there one? Oh, I guess we didn't have to do a filter. We should have just done an any match. Duh. So let's change this to any match. And then we don't need this because we don't care how many there were. And then this is basically just Boolean found. And I have to check to see if there's a way to do this as nicely with assert_j, because I haven't done much testing like this in a while with assert_j. Let's see if we can clean that up. Okay. Oh, Pomodoro timer. All right, so let's get this test going. So we'll assert that. I'm curious. I know I'm. So if we say stream, what can we do here? Contains. So these are all contains. We could do an extracting, but we're actually trying to test against two things. One is that the date is a certain date, and also that the transaction is an interest credit. All right, so then we won't do that right now. So assert that found is true. All right, a little bit of a verbose test, but really the meat is, just basically figuring out how do we assert that we got the transaction we wanted. Another way to go would have been, oh, I know what we can do. Instead of trying to combine the any match into a single predicate, we could first do a filter. and say transaction, so T, and basically is interest credit. So not T, transaction. Why did you complete it that way? Yeah, that's nicer. Okay, so now we can basically pull this out. Right, so what we're doing is we're saying, all right, give me a stream of them, filter out, and if give me only, I always forget it, I assume it's filter in, really. Turns the stream, that match the, okay. So basically, give me only those that are interest credits, and this will be nice later when we actually do the computation of tracking the interest credits. So we'll do that, and then what we want to do is there any one of those that is on February 1st? We could have done a filter on February 1st and then seen if it's interest credit. Because this is already a nice method lambda, method handle reference. I kind of like this better. I'm just going to change this to a T, and that way we can save some room and pull it up here. This is breaking the law of Demeter a little bit. I mean, we're not accessing and we're not changing stuff down here, but it does make me wonder if we'll eventually need some method on transaction that says, are you on this specific date, or are you before this specific date? We'll leave this for now. Okay, so I expect this to. So what I like to do is before I run a test. Is I like to predict what's going to happen. That way I am reassured of my understanding, or it gives me a wake-up call that maybe I've missed something. So it's on February 1st. That's today. We're pretending today is February 1st. There's already an interest credit of, so I just thought of something. So I think actually we want to do a count because we don't want to just check that there is any. We actually want to make sure there's only one. And I know we have a test elsewhere that checks for only one. That was a test actually that I'm currently ignoring. But I'd like to sort of be sure that well, so here's where you sort of go back and forth in terms of testing. This is sort of the hard part about thinking about a test is, do I care if there were 25 transactions of February 1st? No, all I want to know is that before I started, I didn't have an interest credit for February 1st. I request the balance on the fly. It created one for February 1st. If I call this multiple times, that's a separate thing. All right, so then this is fine. So if today is February 1st, I think I already have the code. This code already does it. Yeah, I'm gonna, Pomodoro is telling me now I've just blown through the break, but we're almost there. So let's run all the tests. I think this will pass. Because in a sense, this case is already handled. And let me just make sure that I'm running all the tests. I'm just going to run all the interest credit tests. Okay. Right, so this one we're ignoring. And so there's basically, yeah, let me actually make sure I always show the ones that are ignored. So I've got missing 1 month credit should add 1 month, right? Because that's a scenario that in a sense we've already covered. I'm going to take a 5-minute break, and when we come back, we will look at the next scenario, which is let's see which scenario. I think we'll do this scenario next. Or this one, not sure. This one we basically have to generate a sequence of to fill in. If we do, we'll do this one. Let's move on now to this scenario where given today is still the first of a month, basically the interest was already credited for today. Then when we request the balance, basically there are no new interest credits. So in this case, we're going to basically say, and actually this is the test we ignored. On first of month should only be deposited once. So basically we're going to make that test work. So now we have sort of a more concrete thing. So let's go to that test. And so this will force us to, well, it'll force us to fix it. So let's do that, do that. So here the scenario we already had was we were in the year 2017, which is fine. Mix it up a bit. Again, thank God we don't have to worry about leap years or anything like that. We don't care if interest is credited on a weekend or a weekday. Those are all problems that other systems have to worry about, not this one. So given an account with $100 already in there, when the account balance is requested, we already know that if we did this, because we're on the first, then, so now one thing we can do is we can be a bit more precise about how we're validating whether the transactions are correct. So let's see. So, okay. The other thing is we have to now make sure that the last interest credit was already given on this date. And so that way we won't need to call account balance twice because they're basically, well, we can actually leave this out. So basically, yeah, we'll do that. So we want to make sure that no interest is credited. So this will generate an interest credit for today, which is 2017 to 1/2017, right? Because that's this. Okay, so we don't have to check that the balance is precisely this. What we can do is we actually now want to make sure that the transactions are correct. Because we already have one that's calculating whether the interest was calculated correctly. Oh, there's another scenario that I just realized for this test. So let's go back and add that before I forget. So there's the case where, let's say, given today is, we'll do March 1st, 2019, and no interest was ever credited when we request the balance. So what do we want to happen here? All right, so the scenario is there's maybe one transaction, maybe the account is new. Or just, somebody was importing transactions and no interest was ever credited. In that case, what kind of catch-up do we do? So this is not a technical problem. This is actually a business product issue. What do I want to happen if basically either I have no transactions or I have a bunch of transactions. If I have no transactions, um, if I have no transactions, at what date does it go back to fill in? If I have only if I have transactions but none of those are interest credits, where do I go back to, right? What do I fill in? So since that's basically impossible to figure out, I think the solution here is only credit for today. So basically, if no interest was ever credited, and today is the day where we credit interest, we're not going to do any kind of catch up like we do up here in this scenario. Then basically we add credit only for 3/1 of 2019. Right? So in a sense, if the account was opened somewhere in mid-February, and then the first time interest was basically balance was requested on the interest credit day, um, then that makes sense, right? Because we don't actually have a transaction that says account open, which would help here. But also just thinking about like who are the users of this, right? Somebody's been keeping track of their kids' transactions. Uh, there might be some who are like me who are actually giving him an interest credit, but a lot of them might just be like, hey, I've got a spreadsheet, and no, we never did interest. So I wouldn't even want to go back to the first deposit date or something like that. I'm going to say, look, now that you're in KidBank, you're getting interest credits, and the first time that they're eligible for that, they're only going to get that month. All right. So we're going to have to handle that situation, but not yet. Just didn't want to forget about it, because that's going to affect this guy. All right, so we are here, right? So we requested the balance. We're going to request the balance again. And now we want to do some assertions against the transaction. So we're going to do we're basically going to do this, something like this. This is the second time we're using this kind of thing. If I end up with one more usage of that, I might be thinking about whether I want to create a utility class in the test, or maybe this is something that clients of account might find useful, is say, give me transactions of only this type. We won't need that yet, but I do have a feature where basically it's categorize transactions. Then we'll see that that's necessary. But for now, we're good. So we'll go here. We're not going to assert the number of transactions. We're actually going to do, we're looking for, given today is 2017, February 1st. So basically that's today. Right, we've asked for the account once. That's when the transaction for interest should have been credited. When we ask for it again, it should not add it again. And here, we're basically looking for, give me all the interest credit ones. This should be February of 2017. So basically, now we don't want any match, because what we want to make sure is that there's only one. So we're going to say count. Oh, right. There's no count match. So wonder if I could say all match. No, there still might be two of that day. Find first for limit, peak. Just seeing if there's anything better. I think we'll do filter, and then we'll do count. And this is long number found. And so we're going to basically say that this is equal to 1. Right, so we expect that even though we ask for balance multiple times, and even though it's the first, we expect that all interest credits on this day, there should only be one of them. So this one, this one should fail. Right, because it wasn't 1, there are 2. Okay, good. So let's go into account. So basically it says credit interest is needed, if should credit interest. So right now all it does is it looks to see if it's the first of the month and we haven't credited interest yet for today. So basically this is so this is if today is first of month. And now what we want to do is we want to find the most recent interest credit. So we'll say transactions, stream, filter, that's that. Okay, so we're basically saying, give me all the interest ones. Let's sort by date time. Let's see. I always forget how to do sorted. Returns a string, the elements of the string are not comparable. We basically need to provide how these are sorted. Turns out that we actually did this in our controller, so I can look for how we did it there. I always like to look at examples. Oh, okay, so it's basically comparing. And happen to do it reversed. So let's do that. Okay, so now we have all the transactions that are interest credit ones. We have sorted it in reverse chronological order. So the latest one is the first one. Find first. So this should give us the latest one, or null if there aren't any. Okay, so we'll assign that to a variable. So this is the most recent interest credit. This belongs in a method. Let's use this. So we'll say today is the first of the month, and the most recent interest credit oh, thank you. I do my best. Appreciate it. Yeah, I really, so someone was kind of like, you know, complimenting me on my code. Thank you. And the comments. So I try to keep my comments to something that you couldn't figure out by looking at the code. So like here, calculating the interest, but the rounding up takes care of what the heck is this plus 1.0.5. But thank you. So what I want to do here is I want to figure out, there are two possibilities for the most recent interest credit. Either there is none, and so since this is an optional, that means basically it won't be present. So, sorry, my head jumped ahead a bit. What I want to figure out for this method is, do we want an interest credit? So if today is the first of the month, good. And was the most recent interest credit basically not today? We could actually put that into the filter. So we filtered, and we're getting the most recent one, but actually there's no point in sorting in reverse chronological order. We can just search through all of them. We're searching through all of them anyway. I mean, the sort is going to touch them all anyway. And again, we don't have that many, right? Upper limit might be 1,000. So we don't want to just find it because we actually don't care much about it. We just want to know, is the most recent interest credit date, is that one today? So we don't need to actually sort it, so we'll take that out. We will use the transaction date time. So we're going to basically compare that. But basically what we want is filter. And so in this case, the predicate is transaction date time I don't want get day of month. I want to know, does the month day of month, no, get month value. That's what I want. So is the month value, although I wonder if I could get month. We'll try month value. Basically is equals, does it not have, that's month value. So equals. Get month value returns an int. And yes, that's range from 1 to 12, thank God. Clock, we want to basically get the current daytime. Okay, so what we need to do is let's extract this. Basically, we need, what is the current month? Because we're already testing for, to see if today is the first. And what we want is to extract this into now. So this first part is the day of month 1, and then this part is going to be, is this most recent credit transaction, or actually, is there, let's take this out because we don't need this yet. And I know IntelliJ is getting confused, hold on. Clean up my formatting. Okay, so now this is easier to read. So basically what we're saying is, give me all transactions, now just give me the interest credit ones, and now find if the month, we're going to check the month and year. So transaction, since we're going to do that, we could get fancy and map transaction date time. And so now this is a little easier to work with because now we just have date times. So we can say local date time. So the local date time get month value equals now dot get month value, and look at a time get year value equals now get year. And we don't actually need to do a filter. We just want to say, is there one? So we can now do find any. Sorry, any match, because we don't care about the content. We just want to find out, is there any match? Assign that to a variable. Has transaction for current month. Okay, let's clean up formatting. Let's move this onto a new line so we can read this easier. Why did you wrap to the next line? Just over the limit. I'm going to rename this to just date. There we go. Okay, so now what we're doing is we're getting a stream of all our transactions. We're saying we only want the interest credit ones. We are mapping them to date time because that's all we care about. And now we're looking to see, do any of these match basically now? And so if any match for a transaction on the current where the month and year match, right? Because we already know that days match, right? We already know that even if it's the 3rd, we want to just see, was there a transaction for this month? You know what? I don't even know if we need this at all, because we don't care when we credit the transactions, right? We just want to know, has there been a credit transaction for this month? I don't even think we need this. So basically, we just want to say, basically has transaction for current month. And no, I'm not going to inline that, thank you. We've got tests, let's see what happens. Aha, interesting, okay. So we had some tests that basically said on not first of, so on first of month should only be deposited once, missing 1 month, and on first of month. So this is broken because we're not returning the right thing. So this one I would have expected to work, right? Because this one is basically saying when we ask for the balance, interest should have been credited. Right? Because it doesn't matter what today's date is. We're basically saying if there hasn't been, oh, are we flipped? Ah, we're flipped, right? Because we want to credit interest if there isn't already a transaction for this month. I think that's right. Or did I just make a big assumption? Nope, got it right. I know sometimes I jump ahead a little bit without really thinking it through, but that felt right. So the idea is that if there's already an interest credit transaction for this month, then we don't want to credit interest. And it doesn't matter what date is. So really it's have we, right? Because if it's February 3rd, we just want to know, was there a credit for February 1st? So have we not credited interest yet for this month? All right, so Boy, streams sure come in handy for this stuff, some of this stuff. All right, so we basically, all those tests are passing except on not first of month, no interest should be deposited. So now the question is, does this test make any sense? This test is saying if it's not the first, then there shouldn't be any interest. But actually, that's not valid. That was an assumption I made earlier when I was only calculating interest on the first. But that was actually wrong, and that's what I started with the stream about, is that was a mistake. So actually this test isn't valid. Because we want interest credited. I don't care what today is, just make sure we catch up and we haven't double credited interest. So let's run these tests again. I just want to be sure. And actually I want to run all the tests, or at least all the unit tests. No, not all the tests. Do not run all the tests. That will take too long. Plus there's stuff that's broken, I know. I want to run all the unit tests. That's what I want. Oh, right. These are the ones that are failing because they're not taking into account the fact that interest is being credited. We're going to handle that, though. That's okay. We're going to handle that because we said this thing, sort of opening a new account, we won't go back in time and credit them since, the bank was invented. So we won't do that. I forgot to set my Pomodoro timer again, darn it. But I'm actually at the end of my 90-minute block for today. So this is a good stopping point since I have some failing tests. What I want to do is just sort of look at, match these with my scenarios. So this test, interest should only be deposited once. Matches sort of this one. So I have a test for this. And actually this test name is wrong now. It's basically, it doesn't matter what date is. Interest should be only deposited once for current month. So there's going to be a bunch more tests around this, but I just want to make sure that we've got a test for that. Do we have a test for this? Missing 1 month should add 1 month credit. I wonder, are these basically the same? So this one's looking to see, so this one's saying it should only be deposited once. This one is saying if it's missing, it should be added. So those are two different things. Yeah, so that's the scenario. That's this one. No, that's this one. This one is this one. No. Do I not have a scenario for this? Ah, it's this one. Right. So we've got these tested, and the scenario is tested. So we have a couple of other scenarios to test that we'll test next time. All right, and I will see you next time. And please feel free, you can email me, ted@tedmyoung.com, or you can hit me up with issues or anything on the GitHub repo. I'll push this to the repo, even though I generally don't like to push when there's stuff failing like this. It's okay because this is also so I can match it up with the episodes. All right, thank you very much, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.